The mining asteroid station Kepler 442 floated in the cold darkness of space. Like a metal island surrounded by nothing but stars and emptiness, the station was not a peaceful place. 3 different alien races lived there, and they did not like each other very much. In fact, they hated each other with a burning passion that had lasted for many years. The eastern part of the station belonged to the Vorthak. These aliens looked like giant lizards that walked on 2 legs. Their scales changed colors depending on their mood, and right now most of them showed angry red and orange patterns. The Vorthak were strong and proud. They controlled the deepest mining tunnels where the most valuable crystals could be found. Their leader, Captain Sektar, was a massive creature with scars covering his dark green scales. He had fought in many wars and trusted no one except his own kind. In the western sections lived the Quilani. These aliens looked like huge insects with wings that sparkled like diamonds. Their big round eyes could see in all directions at once, and they made clicking sounds when they talked. The Quilani were very smart, and they built machines that could do amazing things. They worked together like bees in a hive and rarely spoke to outsiders. Their leader, Speaker Velix, had the most beautiful wings on the station, but her voice was cold as ice when she spoke to non-Quilani. A central part of the station was home to the Nithori. These aliens were very different from the others. They had no solid bodies. Instead, they were made of colorful gases that swirled and danced inside special suits. The suits kept them from floating away and helped them talk to solid beings. The Nithori were mysterious and often seemed to know things before they happened. Their leader, collective leader Mordan, was the wisest of his people, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Between these 3 groups lived a small team of humans. Commander Deho was in charge of the human diplomatic mission. He was a kind man with gentle eyes and a patient smile. His job was to keep the peace between the alien races and make sure everyone followed the mining agreements. This was not an easy job because the 3 alien groups fought about everything. The most special thing about the human team was that Commander Deho had brought his 5-year-old daughter, Thura, with him. The little girl had big curious eyes and black hair that her father tied in 2 small ponytails. Every morning she wore a bright yellow jumpsuit that made her easy to spot in the dark metal hallways of the station. Ra was not like the serious adults around her. She was full of energy and questions. She wanted to know everything about the aliens and was not afraid of any of them. The alien workers found this very strange. Most alien children were taught to fear other species, but Biora seemed to think everyone was her friend. Every morning, Biora would wake up early and eat breakfast with her father in the human quarters. Then she would spend her day exploring the station while her father worked. She had a small robotic pet named Chip that followed her everywhere. Chip was round and silver and made happy beeping sounds. Biora loved Chip very much and talked to him like he was a real animal. The aliens did not know what to make of Biora. At first they found her annoying. She was loud and curious and always getting in their way when she tried to talk to them. They would growl or click or hiss and walk away, but Biora was not easily discouraged. She kept trying to be friendly. One day, Biora saw a young Vorthak worker named Tekri sitting alone during his lunch break. He looked sad and was not eating his food. Biora walked over to him and offered him half of her sandwich. Tekri was so surprised that his scales turned bright purple. He had never seen such kindness from an alien before. He carefully took the sandwich and ate it while Biora sat next to him and chattered about her day. Another time, Biora found a Quilani maintenance worker named Zilpa fixing a broken pipe. Biora watched with wide eyes as Zilpa used her crystalline wings to create sparks that welded the metal together. But Biora said the wings looked like rainbows and asked if she could touch them. Zilpa was confused, but let the child gently touch one wingtip. Biora giggled and said it felt warm and tingly. Even the mysterious Netheri were not safe from Biora curiosity. She met a young collective member named Nixel who was checking air quality in the corridors. Biora pressed her small hand against his containment suit and said she could feel his warmth inside. She told him he felt friendly and nice. Nixel had never experienced such direct contact with a solid being before. It made him feel strange and wonderful. Slowly, some of the younger aliens began to look forward to seeing Biora. She brought joy and laughter to the serious station. Her innocent questions made them think about things in new ways. Her fearless Friendship showed them that maybe the other species were not so different after all, but the alien leaders did not like this growing friendship. They warned their people to stay away from the human child. They said she was dangerous and might be spying on them. They increased patrols and tried to keep their workers from talking to Biora. This made the little girl sad, but she kept trying to be kind to everyone. One morning, Biora was playing with Chip in the corridor near the mining tunnels. Her father was in an important meeting with the alien leaders, and she was supposed to wait for him in the human quarters, but Biora got bored and decided to explore. She had never been to the deep mining areas before, and she was curious about what was down there. Chip started rolling down a tunnel that led to an old abandoned mining shaft. Biora called for him to come back, but the little robot kept going deeper into the tunnel. Biora followed him, calling his name and laughing. She thought it was a game and did not realize she was going into a dangerous area. The tunnel got darker and darker as Biora went deeper. She could hear strange creaking sounds from the walls and ceiling. The old mining equipment cast scary shadows, but Biora was not afraid. She just wanted to catch Chip and bring him back to safety. Finally, she found Chip at the end of the tunnel. The little robot was beeping sadly because he was stuck between two large rocks. Biora knelt down to help him, and that was when disaster struck. The old tunnel had been weakened by years of mining, and the ceiling could not hold any more. With a terrible rumbling sound, the ceiling began to collapse. Huge chunks of rock fell down, blocking the tunnel entrance. Biora grabbed Chip and ran toward the exit, but it was too late. The rocks fell too fast, and soon the tunnel was completely blocked. Biora was trapped in the small space at the end of the shaft. Little girl called for help, but her voice was muffled by the tons of rock between her and the rest of the station. She was scared and alone in the dark with only Chip for company. The air was getting harder to breathe, and she could hear more rocks shifting above her head. Back on the main part of the station, Commander Daeho finished his meeting and went to look for his daughter. When he could not find her in the human quarters, he started to worry. He asked the other humans if they had seen Biora, but no one knew where she was. The worry turned to panic when they found the collapsed tunnel. Security cameras showed Biora following Chip into the dangerous area just before the cave-in. Daeho ran to the collapse site and called his daughter name, but there was no answer. The pile of rocks was massive and would take special equipment to clear. Daeho immediately called for help from the alien races. He explained that his daughter was trapped and needed rescue equipment. The human team had basic tools, but nothing powerful enough to move the huge rocks that blocked the tunnel. They needed the advanced technology that the aliens possessed, but when Daeho asked for help, he received cold responses. Captain Sektar said that human problems were not Vorthak concerns. Speaker Velix buzzed that the hive had its own priorities. Collective leader Mordan simply stated that their contracts did not include rescue operations. The aliens seemed content to let the humans deal with their own crisis. Deep in the collapsed tunnel, Biora held Chip close and tried not to cry. She could hear her father calling her name from far away. She wanted to answer, but she was getting tired and the air was thick. The little girl did not understand why the ceiling had fallen or why no one was coming to help her. She pressed a button on her emergency communicator, and her weak voice came through the station speakers asking for help. The sound of the frightened child echoed through the corridors, reaching the ears of every being on the station. For the first time, the three alien races heard the voice of true innocence calling out in the darkness. The aliens tried to ignore the sound and continue their work, but something about Biora's voice made them feel uncomfortable. They remembered her kindness and her fearless friendship. They began to wonder if maybe they should help after all. But their leaders had said no, and going against orders could mean serious punishment. As night fell on the station, Biora's small voice continued to call for help, getting weaker with each passing hour. The collapse was getting worse and time was running out. The little girl, who had tried so hard to bring friendship to the station, was now trapped and alone while the adults argued about who should save her. The three alien races went to sleep that night, but many of them could not rest. They kept thinking about the human child and her innocent trust. They wondered what would happen if no one helped her and how they would feel if she died while they did nothing. The seeds of change were planted in their hearts, but it would take something more to make them grow. Hours passed slowly on the mining station, and the situation grew more desperate with each passing moment. Commander Daeho and his human team worked with all their strength trying to move the massive rocks that blocked the tunnel entrance there. Small mining tools sparked against the hard stone but made little progress. The pile of debris was too big and too heavy for human equipment to handle. The human team had brought their emergency rescue kit, but it was designed for simple accidents, not major cave-ins. Their portable drill overheated. After only an hour of use, the hydraulic jacks were too weak to lift the largest boulders. The explosive charges they carried were too small to make a real difference in such a massive collapse. Commander Daeho knelt beside the rock pile and pressed his ear against the stones. He could hear faint sounds from the other side, but Beora's voice was getting weaker. The little girl was calling for her daddy, but her words were hard to understand. The air inside the collapsed tunnel was running out, and everyone knew that time was their enemy. The human medical officer checked her instruments and gave Daeho the bad news. Based on the size of the trapped space and the amount of available air, Beora had maybe 6 hours before the oxygen ran out completely. That was not enough time for the humans to clear the tunnel with their limited equipment. They needed help, and they needed it fast, but the 3 alien races continued to refuse assistance. Captain Sektar had ordered all Vorthok workers to stay away from the human section of the station. Speaker Velix had forbidden any Quilani from offering aid to the rescue effort. Collective leader Morden had declared that Nathori resources would not be wasted on human problems. Yet, something strange was happening among the younger alien workers. They found themselves unable to concentrate on their normal duties. Their thoughts kept drifting back to the trapped human child and her desperate situation. Tekri, the young Vorthok worker, was having the most trouble. He kept remembering the day when Beora had shared her sandwich with him. No one had ever shown him such kindness before, especially not someone from another species. The little girl had sat beside him during his lunch break and chattered happily about her day. She had not cared that he was a Vorthok or that his people were supposed to be enemies of all other races. That memory made Tekri feel something he had never experienced before. His chest felt tight and his scales kept changing colors without his control. The other Vorthok workers noticed his strange behavior and asked what was wrong, but Tekri could not explain it. He just knew that the thought of Beora dying alone in the dark made him feel sick. In the Quilani section of the station, Zilpa was having similar problems. She tried to focus on her maintenance work, but her hands kept shaking as she held her tools. She remembered how Beora had watched her repair work with such fascination. The little girl had asked dozens of questions about Quilani technology and had even said that Zilpa crystalline wings were the most beautiful things she had ever seen. No one had ever called Zilpa beautiful before. The Quilani valued function over form and rarely gave compliments about appearance. But Beora had touched her wingtip with such gentle wonder and had giggled with pure joy at the warm, tingling sensation. The memory made Zilpa's wings flutter with emotions she did not understand. The child had even drawn a picture of Zilpa with her crayons. The drawing was crude and simple, but it showed Zilpa surrounded by rainbow colors with a big smile on her face. Beora had given her the picture and said it was a present for her new friend. Zilpa had kept the drawing hidden in her toolkit and sometimes looked at it when she was feeling lonely. Now, that drawing seemed more precious than any valuable crystal. The thought that Beora might die before they could talk again made Zilpa feel empty inside. She had never experienced such loss before, and it frightened her even. The mysterious Netheri were affected by the crisis. Nixal found himself unable to maintain proper collective consciousness. His thoughts kept separating from the group mind and focusing on individual memories of the human child. He remembered how Beora had pressed her small hand against his containment suit and said she could feel his warmth. That simple gesture had created a connection that Nixal had never experienced before. The Nethori were used to sharing thoughts and feelings with each other, but they rarely connected with solid beings. Beora's touch had been like a bridge between two different worlds. She had treated him not as a strange gas creature, but as a friend. The memory of her innocent words echoed in his mind. She had said he felt friendly and nice and that she wanted to learn more about how Nethori lived. The child had asked if she could visit his people someday and see their gas-formed cities among the stars. Her curiosity and acceptance had touched something deep in his collective soul. As The hours passed. These three young aliens found themselves experiencing emotions they had never felt before. The Vorthak called it Nestfire, the burning need to protect the young and innocent. The Quilani recognized it as Hivake, the pain that came when a member of the community was in danger. The Nithori knew it as Void Echo, the emptiness that demanded to be filled. They began to understand that Biora had become more than just a human child to them. She had become part of their extended family. Her kindness had created bonds that crossed species lines. Her innocent friendship had planted seeds of caring in their hearts that were now growing into something powerful. The three aliens started to question their leader's orders. Why should they let an innocent child die just because she was human? What kind of honor was there in turning away from someone who needed help? How could they call themselves civilized beings if they ignored the suffering of the defenseless? Stekri began pacing in his quarters, his scales shifting between colors of distress and determination. He thought about Vorthak, traditions of protecting the young, and wondered why those traditions should not apply to all young beings. Regardless of species, the code of honor that his people followed demanded courage in the face of danger and compassion for those who could not protect themselves. Eshelpa stopped pretending to work and sat staring at Biora. Crayon drawing the picture showed not just her, but also stick figures of humans, Vorthak and Nithori, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun the child had drawn. A world where everyone was friends and no one was afraid of anyone else. Now that dream seemed to be dying in a collapsed tunnel. Nixol withdrew from the collective consciousness and began broadcasting his memories of Bara to other young Nithori. He shared the feeling of her touch and the warmth of her acceptance. He showed them how she had looked at him with wonder instead of fear, and how she had made him feel truly seen. For the first time, the other young aliens began to experience these shared memories and emotions. The ripple effect spread through the junior ranks of all three species. They started to realize that they had all been touched by the human child kindness in some way. She had offered friendship without asking for anything. In return, she had shown them that differences in appearance did not have to mean differences in worth, but their leaders remained firm in their refusal to help Captain Sektar declared that showing weakness by helping humans would only invite more demands for assistance. Speaker Velik stated that the Hive could not spare resources for non-Quilani problems. Collective leader Morden maintained that the Nithori had no obligation to interfere in human affairs. The young aliens found themselves caught between their growing desire to help and their duty to obey orders. They watched helplessly as the human rescue efforts continued to fail. The drill bits broke against the hard stone, the jacks bent under the weight of the massive boulders. The explosive charges barely scratched the surface of the debris pile. As the fifth hour passed, Biora's voice grew even weaker. Her calls for help became whispers. Her father pressed his face against the rocks and begged her to stay awake, to keep talking to him, but the little girl was getting tired and the air inside her prison was running out. The young aliens felt the weight of their inaction pressing down on them like the rocks that trapped Biora. They knew they had the power to help. The Vorthak had plasma cutters that could slice through solid stone. The Quilani had precision guidance systems that could navigate the unstable debris. The Nithori had atmospheric controls that could create breathing spaces, but they also knew that helping would mean disobeying direct orders from their leaders. It would mean risking punishment, exile, or worse. Yet, as they listened to the fading voice of the dying child, they began to wonder if some things were more important than following orders. The crisis was reaching its breaking point, and something had to give. The young aliens could feel the weight of their decision pressing down on them. They had to choose between blind obedience and moral courage, between following rules and following their hearts. The fate of one small human child hung in the balance, and with it, the future of relationships between all the species on the station deep. In the collapsed tunnel, Biora held Chip close and tried to stay awake. She was scared and alone, but she still believed that someone would come to save her. She did not know that her innocent friendship had already begun to change the hearts of those who had once been her enemies. Her legacy of kindness was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. The sixth hour arrived like a death sentence hanging over the mining station. The human rescue team had pushed their equipment beyond all limits, but disaster struck when they needed success the most. Their main drilling unit suddenly sparked, and exploded in a shower of metal and fire. The explosion injured 2 human workers and destroyed their last hope of breaking through the rock. Barrier Commander Deho watched in horror as his team's final tool was reduced to smoking scrap metal. The blast had been so violent that it weakened the tunnel structure even more, making any further rescue attempts extremely dangerous. The medical team rushed to treat the injured workers, but everyone knew the terrible truth: they had no way to reach. Leora, before her air ran out, the father pressed his hands against the cold stone and called his daughter's name, but her response was so weak he could barely hear it. The little girl was fighting to stay conscious, but the lack of oxygen was winning. The battle, her voice came through the communication system in whispers that broke every heart that heard them. Deho fell to his knees beside the rock pile and begged the alien leaders one more time to help save his daughter. He offered them anything. They wanted mining rights, exclusive contracts, even human technology secrets, but the 3 leaders remained unmoved by his desperate pleas. Captain Sektar stood with his massive arms crossed and his scales showing patterns of stubborn determination. He declared that the Vorthag had their own problems and could not waste time on human failures. He reminded his people that showing weakness to other species was the first step toward defeat, and slavery. Speaker Velix buzzed coldly that the Hive had calculated the cost of a rescue operation and found it too expensive for the expected return. She stated that 1 human child was not worth risking. Quilani equipment and personnel, the collective good of her people, came before individual sympathy. Collective Leader Morden floated in his containment suit and spoke in measured tones about the importance of maintaining proper boundaries between species. He explained that helping humans would create dangerous precedents and expectations that the Nethori could not afford to set, but the young aliens were no longer listening to their leaders with blind obedience. Tekri stood up in the middle of Captain Sektar's speech and challenged his commander directly. He asked why Vorthak honor did not extend to protecting innocent young beings regardless of their species. He demanded to know when courage had become confused with cruelty. The other Vorthak workers gasped at this unprecedented act of defiance. Junior warriors did not question their captains' decisions, especially not in front of other species, but Tekri's scales blazed with colors of righteous anger, and he refused to back down. He spoke of the warrior code that demanded protection of the helpless and justice for the innocent. Captain Sektar roared his displeasure and ordered Tekri to be silent, but other young Vorthak began to speak up as well. They talked about their own memories of Biora kindness and questioned why their people's honor should not apply to all children. The rebellion was spreading through the Vorthak ranks like wildfire in the Quilani section. Zilpa was creating her own disturbance. She openly challenged Speaker Velix about the true meaning of Hive loyalty. She asked if the collective good really meant abandoning those who had shown them friendship and kindness. She pulled out a crayon drawing and showed it to the other Quilani workers. The simple picture of all the species holding hands under a bright sun created a powerful emotional response among the Quilani. The drawing represented everything they had lost in their focus on efficiency and profit. It showed a world where cooperation replaced competition and friendship conquered. Few other Quilani maintenance workers began to remember their own interactions with Dora. The child had always been curious about their work and had praised their skills with genuine admiration. She had made them feel proud of their abilities and appreciated for their contributions no one else had ever shown such interest in their daily tasks. Speaker Velix tried to maintain order, but her authority was crumbling as more workers joined the rebellion. The hive mind that had always been unified was fracturing along generational lines. The younger Quilani were experiencing individual thoughts and feelings that conflicted with the collective will among the Nethori. The situation was even more dramatic. Mixel had been broadcasting his memories of Biora to other young collective members, and the emotional impact was spreading through their gas-formed community like ripples in a pond. The shared experience of the child's innocent acceptance was creating unprecedented unity among the junior Netherithi. Began to question collective leader Morden cold logic about maintaining species boundaries. They remembered their own history when the Nethori had been refugees fleeing their dying homeworld and other species had helped them survive. Why should they not return that kindness when given the chance? The Young Nethori started pulsing in synchronized patterns that matched their emotional state. Their gases swirled with colors of distress and determination as they contemplated defying their leader's orders the collective consciousness was experiencing. Something it had never felt before: moral conflict between duty and compassion as the three groups of young aliens argued with their leaders. The situation in the collapsed tunnel reached its most critical point. Bahara's voice was barely audible now, and her father was calling desperately for her to stay awake. The little girl was fighting unconsciousness, but the battle was almost lost. Then something magical happened that changed everything. Bahara's weak voice came through the communication system. One more time, but instead of calling for help, she began to sing. She remembered a lullaby that her mother had taught her before she died, and she sang it softly to comfort herself in the darkness. The song was simple and pure, a melody about dreams and hope and the promise that morning always comes after the longest night. The words spoke of love that transcends all boundaries and courage that grows stronger in the face of fear. The little girl's voice carried the song through the stations, speakers reaching every corner of the mining facility. The effect was immediate and profound. Every being on the station stopped what they were doing and listened to the haunting melody. The song seemed to speak directly to their hearts in a language that all species could understand. It was the voice of innocence itself calling out from the darkness. The Vorthak workers felt their scales shifting to colors they had never seen before, deep purples and golds that their ancestors had used to mark the most sacred moments. The song awakened memories of their own young and the fierce protective love that defined their species. The warrior hearts that had been hardened by years of conflict began to soften. The Quilani found themselves producing harmonious vibrations that matched the melody, their crystalline wings resonating with the pure tones of the lullaby. The collective consciousness that had been focused on efficiency and profit suddenly remembered the original purpose of the hive: to protect and nurture all life. The Nethori collective members began pulsing in perfect synchronization, their gases swirling in patterns of deep emotional response. The song created a unity among them that transcended their normal group mind. It was as if every individual Nethori was feeling the same profound sadness and determination. Even the hardened leaders felt the impact of Bahara's lullaby. Captain Sektar found himself remembering his own offspring who had died in the wars that created the current conflicts between species. He thought about the children who would never grow up because adults could not put aside their hatred and fear. Speaker Velix felt the harmonious vibrations of her people's response and realized that the hive was experiencing something more powerful than any collective decision they had ever made. The song was creating a new kind of unity, one based on shared compassion rather than shared purpose. Collective leader Morden felt his carefully controlled emotions threatening to break free as the melody touched parts of his consciousness he had long suppressed. He remembered the Nethori children, who had once filled their ships with laughter and joy before the wars had made them cold and distant. The lullaby continued floating through the station corridors and carrying with it the desperate hope of a dying child who still believed in the goodness of others. Bahara was using her last strength to bring comfort to herself, but her song was actually bringing something much more important to everyone else. As the final notes of the lullaby faded into silence, the station remained completely quiet for a long moment. Then something unprecedented happened. Captain Sektar stepped forward and looked directly at Commander Deho. His voice was rough with emotion as he spoke. He said that the Vorthak had plasma cutters that could slice through the hardest stone, but they would need precise guidance to avoid causing another collapse. He looked at Speaker Velix and asked if the Quilani could provide the navigation assistance that such a delicate operation would require. Speaker Velix felt the weight of her people's expectations and the memory of the child song still echoing in her mind. She nodded slowly and said that Quilani precision technology could guide the cutting operation, but only if the Nethori could monitor air quality and create breathing spaces for the trapped child. Collective leader Morden floated silently for a moment as he processed the magnitude of what was being proposed. Then he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of centuries of isolation and mistrust. He said that The moment the three alien leaders agreed to work together, the mining station buzzed with activity like a hive that had been stirred to life. Workers from all three species began gathering in the human section, carrying equipment that had never been used for cooperative purposes before. The sight was unprecedented and historic, but also filled with tension and uncertainty. Captain Sektar arrived with a team of Vorthak engineers carrying their most powerful plasma-cutting equipment. The massive devices looked like weapons of war with their gleaming metal surfaces and dangerous energy cores. The Vorthak had designed these tools to cut through the hardest materials in the galaxy, but they had never been used for rescue operations. The plasma cutters were incredibly powerful, but also extremely dangerous. One wrong move could vaporize the remaining tunnel structure or create toxic gases that would kill Beora instantly. The Vorthak knew their equipment better than anyone, but they had never attempted such a delicate operation before. Speaker Velix brought a team of Quilani technicians with their most advanced guidance systems. The crystalline devices could map underground spaces with perfect accuracy and guide cutting operations with precision measured in millimeters. The Quilani had spent generations perfecting these tools for their mining operations, but the guidance systems had never been used in cooperation with other species technology. The Quilani and Vorthak equipment used different power sources, communication protocols, and safety systems. Making them work together would require technical innovations that had never been attempted before. Collective leader Morden led a group of Nethori specialists who brought their atmospheric manipulation devices. The gas-form beings could monitor air quality through the tiniest cracks and create breathing pockets in spaces too small for solid beings to enter. Their abilities were perfect for keeping Beora alive during the rescue. However, the Nethori had never worked directly with solid beings before. Their atmospheric controls were designed for their own gas-form physiology, and adapting them for human respiratory needs would require careful calculations and constant adjustments. Commander Deho watched in amazement as the three groups of aliens set up their equipment around the collapsed site. For the first time in decades, representatives of all three species were working in the same space without fighting or threatening each other. The cooperation was awkward and tentative, but it was real. The technical challenges were enormous. The Vorthak plasma cutters operated on high-frequency energy that interfered with Quilani crystalline guidance systems. The Quilani precision instruments were so sensitive that they picked up false readings from Nethori atmospheric manipulators. The Nethori gas-form sensors were confused by the electromagnetic fields generated by the other species. Equipment Ekri and his fellow young Vorthak workers tried to modify their plasma cutters to reduce electromagnetic interference, but they had never worked with non-Vorthak technology before. They studied the Quilani guidance systems with fascination and frustration, trying to understand how crystalline matrices could process information so differently from their own neural networks. Opa and her Quilani colleagues attempted to recalibrate their precision instruments to filter out the atmospheric disturbances created by the Nethori, but the gas-form beings created such complex environmental changes that the crystalline computers could not predict their effects. The mathematics involved were beyond anything they had encountered. Nixel and the other young Nethori worked to adapt their atmospheric controls for human physiology, but they had never studied solid being respiratory systems before. They had to learn about oxygen and carbon dioxide ratios, lung capacity, and breathing patterns, while also monitoring the constantly changing conditions inside the collapsed tunnel. The cooperation was made even more difficult by the fundamental differences in how each species approached problem-solving. The Vorthak believed in direct action and overwhelming force. They wanted to cut through the rocks as quickly as possible and deal with any problems as they arose. The Quilani preferred careful planning and precise execution. They wanted to map every detail of the collapsed site and create detailed mathematical models before making any cuts. They believed that patience and accuracy were more important than speed. The Nethori took a collective approach that considered all possible outcomes simultaneously. They wanted to explore every option and reach consensus. Before taking any action, they believed that wisdom came from understanding all perspectives before choosing a course. These different approaches led to frequent arguments and misunderstandings. The Vorthak became frustrated with Quilani delays and Nethori indecision. The Quilani were annoyed by Vorthek impatience and Nethori complexity. The Nethori were confused by Vorthek's simplicity and Quilani rigidity, but every time the cooperation threatened to break down, someone would remember or lullaby or hear her weak voice calling through the communication system. The dying child became the focal point that held the alliance together when species differences seemed insurmountable. The rescuers would remember why they were working together slowly and painfully. The three groups began to find common ground. The young aliens who had pushed for cooperation took the lead in bridging the gaps between their species. They translated technical concepts from one system to another. They mediated disputes between different approaches. They found creative solutions that combined the best aspects of each people's methods. Stekri discovered that Vorthek plasma technology could be modulated to match Quilani crystalline frequencies by adjusting the energy output in specific patterns. The modification required precise timing that only Quilani guidance systems could provide. This breakthrough allowed the two technologies to work together instead of interfering with each other. Zelpa realized that Nethori atmospheric changes followed patterns that could be predicted using modified Quilani mathematical models. The gas-form beings were not random in their effects, but followed complex rules that crystalline computers could learn to anticipate. This discovery allowed the guidance systems to compensate for atmospheric disturbance. Seismic Soul found that human respiratory needs could be met using Nethori atmospheric manipulation techniques if the gas mixtures were adjusted for solid being physiology. The key was understanding that humans processed gases differently than Nethori, but the same principles of atmospheric control could be applied. As the three groups shared their knowledge and techniques, something remarkable began to happen. They started to see past their surface differences to recognize the underlying similarities in their approaches to problem-solving. All three species valued precision, safety, and success. They all wanted to minimize risk and maximize effectiveness. Vorthek realized that their direct approach was more effective when guided by Quilani precision. The plasma cutters could work faster and safer when they had accurate information about what they were cutting. The combination of Vorthek power and Quilani guidance created capabilities that neither species could achieve alone. Quilani discovered that their careful planning was enhanced by Vorthek practical experience and Nethori comprehensive analysis. The crystalline computers could process information faster when they had real-world data from plasma cutting operations and atmospheric monitoring. The three-way collaboration produced better results than any single species could achieve. The Nethori learned that their collective decision-making was strengthened by Vorthek determination and Quilani logical analysis. The gas-form beings could explore more options when they had solid being perspectives on practical limitations and mathematical constraints. The cooperation expanded their understanding of possible solutions. As the alliance grew stronger, the rescue operation began to take shape. The three species developed a coordinated plan that used all their capabilities in sequence. First, the Nethori would create breathing pockets and monitor air quality. Then the Quilani would map the exact structure of the collapse and plan the cutting sequence. Finally, the Vorthek would use their plasma cutters to create a rescue tunnel, but the plan was incredibly complex and required perfect coordination between all three species. Every step had to be precisely timed and executed. Any mistake could cause another collapse or kill Dora before they could reach her. The margin for error was so small that success seemed almost impossible. Alien workers spent hours practicing their coordination, running simulations, and testing their equipment combinations. They had to learn to trust each other completely because each species would be depending on the others for success. The Vorthek had to trust Quilani guidance even when they could not see the reasoning behind it. The Quilani had to trust Vorthek cutting techniques even when the plasma operations seemed too aggressive for their precision-focused minds. The Nethori had to trust both solid being species to work in their atmospheric modifications even when the changes felt foreign and uncomfortable. As they worked together, the three groups began to understand each other in ways they had never imagined. The Vorthek learned that Quilani coldness was actually deep emotional control, and that their precision came from caring so much about outcomes that they could not accept failure. The Quilani discovered that Vorthek aggression was really protective instinct channeled into determination and that their directness came from refusing to waste time when lives were at stake, the Nithori realized that solid being. The rescue operation began with careful precision as the three alien species worked together for the first time in their violent history. The Nithori team moved first using their gas form abilities to slip through tiny cracks in the rock pile and assess the situation inside the collapsed tunnel. Their atmospheric sensors painted a grim picture of what they found. Nixal managed to squeeze his gaseous form through a gap barely wider than a human finger and reached the space where Biora was trapped. The little girl was unconscious now, lying still beside her robotic pet chip in the small air pocket that remained. The oxygen levels were dangerously low, and toxic gases from the rock dust were making the air even harder to breathe through. The communication link Nixal reported that Biora was still alive but barely breathing. The child had maybe 30 minutes of usable air left, and even that was contaminated with dangerous particles. The Nithori immediately began working to create cleaner breathing pockets using their atmospheric manipulation abilities. The gas-form beings carefully adjusted the air mixture around Biora, filtering out the toxic particles and increasing the oxygen concentration. It was delicate work because too much oxygen could be harmful to human lungs and too little would not help her regain consciousness. The Nithori had to constantly monitor and adjust their atmospheric controls while the Nithori worked to keep Biora alive. The Quilani team began their precision mapping of the collapse site. Their crystalline guidance system sent invisible beams through the rock pile, creating a detailed three-dimensional map of every boulder, crack, and empty space. The information was incredibly complex, but essential for planning the rescue. Tunnelselpa and her colleagues discovered that the collapse was even more unstable than they had feared. The rocks were held in place by a delicate balance of weight and pressure. Any wrong move could trigger another cave-in that would crush Biora or seal her off forever. The cutting sequence would have to be perfect with no room for error. The Quilani computers calculated hundreds of possible approaches to the rescue tunnel. Each option was analyzed for safety, speed, and probability of success. The mathematics involved were so complex that even the advanced crystalline processors needed several minutes to complete their calculations. Meanwhile, the Vorthak team prepared their plasma cutting equipment for the most precise operation in their species. History Tekri and his fellow engineers had modified their powerful tools to work with microscopic accuracy. The plasma beams could now cut through solid rock with precision measured in fractions of millimeters. Captain Sektar personally supervised the plasma cutter calibration, knowing that his people's reputation for engineering excellence was on the line. The Vorthak had always been proud of their technological achievements, but they had never attempted anything this delicate before. The usual Vorthak approach of overwhelming force had to be replaced with surgical precision. The three teams worked in perfect coordination, sharing information and adjusting their techniques based on real-time feedback from the other species. The Nithori atmospheric readings helped the Quilani refine their structural calculations. The Quilani guidance data allowed the Vorthak to plan their cutting sequence. The Vorthak progress reports helped the Nithori predict changes in airflow patterns, but the rescue faced its first major crisis when the plasma cutters began overheating. The intense energy required for such precise cutting was pushing the Vorthak equipment beyond its design limits. The cooling systems could not handle the sustained high-power operation, and the plasma generators were in danger of catastrophic failure. If the plasma cutters failed, the rescue would be impossible. The human drilling equipment was already destroyed, and no other tools on the station could cut through the collapsed rock. The Vorthak engineers worked frantically to solve the overheating problem, but their cooling technology was not designed for such sustained precision work. Silpa realized that Quilani crystalline technology might provide the solution. The same crystalline matrices that guided the cutting operation could also be used to create cooling systems. The crystal structures could absorb and dissipate heat more efficiently than any metal-based cooling system. Working together, the Quilani and Vorthak teams created a hybrid cooling system that combined plasma technology with crystalline heat absorption. The modification required both species to share technical secrets they had never revealed to anyone else. The cooperation went beyond mere alliance to become true partnership. The hybrid cooling system worked perfectly, allowing the plasma cutters to operate at maximum precision without overheating the cutting operation. Resumed with renewed speed and accuracy. The Vorthek engineers were amazed by the effectiveness of Quilani crystal technology, while the Quilani were impressed by the raw power of Vorthek plasma systems. The rescue faced its second major crisis when a secondary collapse threatened to bury the rescue tunnel. The cutting operation had destabilized a section of the rock pile that the Quilani computers had not identified as dangerous. The massive boulders began shifting and sliding toward the tunnel entrance. The Vorthok team immediately shut down their plasma cutters to avoid making the situation worse, but the secondary collapse was already in motion. Tons of rock were sliding toward the opening they had created, threatening to seal off their access to Biora and possibly crush the rescue tunnel. Nixol and the other Nethori made a desperate decision to use their gas form abilities to create pressure barriers that could hold back the sliding rocks. The technique was extremely dangerous because it required the gaseous beings to concentrate their forms into high-pressure zones that could rupture their containment suits. The Nethori collective coordinated their efforts to create invisible walls of compressed gas that slowed and stopped the secondary collapse. The pressure barriers held the rocks in place long enough for the Vorthek to use their plasma cutters to stabilize the dangerous section with precision cuts. The successful prevention of the secondary collapse required perfect cooperation between all three species. The Quilani provided real-time structural analysis. The Vorthek delivered precise cutting to relieve pressure points, and the Nethori maintained atmospheric barriers that defied the normal laws of physics. But the most dangerous moment came when the rescue tunnel finally reached Biora. 3 days after the rescue operation, the mining station was a completely different place. The tension that had hung in the air for years like a poisonous cloud had been replaced by something unprecedented: cooperation and even friendship between species that had been mortal enemies. Just a week before the successful rescue had proven that working together was not only possible but more effective than fighting Bo-Ra. Recovery was swift and remarkable. The human medical team had been amazed by how quickly she bounced back from her ordeal. The little girl seemed to have an incredible resilience that impressed everyone who met her. Within 2 days, she was sitting up in bed asking questions about the rescue and wanting to thank everyone who had helped save her life. The alien rescuers visited her constantly, bringing gifts and sharing stories of their own childhoods. Tekri brought her a small crystal that Vorthek children used as toys, explaining that it would glow different colors depending on her mood. Zopa created a beautiful crystalline sculpture that played musical tones when touched, showing Biora how Quilani art combined beauty with function. Excel gave her the most special gift of all, a small atmospheric generator that created swirling patterns of colored gas inside a transparent container. He explained that Nethori children played with similar devices to learn about gas dynamics and atmospheric control. Biora was fascinated by the dancing colors and spent hours watching the patterns change. But the most important change was not in Biora room but throughout the entire station. The three alien species had begun working together on their regular mining operations, and the results were extraordinary. The combination of Vorthok strength, Quilani precision, and Nethori atmospheric control made the mining process faster, safer, and more profitable than ever before. The Vorthok discovered that their powerful equipment worked much better when guided by Quilani navigation systems. They could extract more valuable crystals with less damage to the surrounding rock. The precision guidance also reduced accidents and equipment failures, saving both time and money. Quilani found that their careful planning was enhanced by Vorthek practical experience. The warrior species had learned efficient techniques through centuries of resource extraction, and their knowledge helped the Quilani optimize their mathematical models. The cooperation improved both speed and accuracy. The Nethori realized that their atmospheric monitoring abilities were much more valuable when combined with solid being mining operations. They could detect dangerous gas pockets and unstable air currents that threatened worker safety. Their early warning systems prevented accidents that could have killed or injured dozens of workers. The mining operation that had been barely profitable under the old system of competition and conflict was now producing record yields. With unprecedented safety ratings, the three species were accomplishing more together than they had ever achieved separately, but the changes went far beyond mere efficiency. The alien workers were beginning to understand and appreciate each other. As individuals, rather than just members of hostile species, they shared meals together during break times, with each species trying foods from the other culture's young. Vorthek workers learned to appreciate the delicate beauty of Quilani crystalline art, while Quilani technicians gained respect for the raw power and determination of Vorthek. Engineering Nithori collective members began to understand the value of individual thinking, while solid being species learned the benefits of group decision. Making the three alien leaders watch these developments with mixed emotions. Captain Sektar found himself questioning the warrior traditions that had kept his people isolated and hostile for so long. The successful cooperation had proven that strength could be enhanced rather than weakened by working with other speaker Veliks. Struggled with the realization that the hive had been wrong about the value of other species, the mathematical precision that her people prized so highly was actually improved by the different perspectives and approaches that cooperation brought. Collective leader Mordan experienced the most profound change of all. The Nithori dedication to collective wisdom had always made them suspicious of individual relationships, but the rescue operation had shown that personal connections could create powerful motivations for cooperation. The three leaders began meeting regularly to discuss ways to formalize their new cooperation. They established joint committees to oversee mining operations, shared research projects to develop new technologies, and cultural exchange programs to help their peoples understand each other better. Bora played a central role in these cultural exchanges. The little girl moved freely between all sections of the station, treating every being she met as a potential friend. Her innocent curiosity and fearless acceptance continued to break down barriers that formal diplomacy could not touch. She learned to speak basic phrases in all three alien languages and delighted in teaching human words to her alien friends. She organized games that included players from all species and created art projects that celebrated the diversity of the station community. The little girl established a daily routine of visiting different parts of the station, spending time with workers from each species, and learning about their customs and traditions. She became an unofficial ambassador, carrying messages of friendship between groups that had never communicated directly before. Commander Deho watched his daughter's accomplishments with pride and amazement. He began sending regular reports to Earth describing the unprecedented cooperation that was developing on the station. His recommendations for changes in human diplomatic strategy were based on the lessons Biora had taught through her simple approach to friendship. The Human Diplomatic Corps was initially skeptical of Deho reports. The idea that a 5-year-old child could succeed where trained diplomats have failed seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. The mining station was producing better results than any facility in the galaxy, and the three alien species were working together voluntarily. Earth began developing new diplomatic protocols based on the Kepler 442 model. The focus shifted from managing conflicts between species to encouraging cooperation and shared projects. The human approach emphasized finding common ground and building personal relationships. Rather than negotiating formal treaties, other mining stations and space facilities began requesting human diplomatic teams trained in the new methods. The success of the Kepler 442 cooperation was spreading throughout the galaxy as word spread about the unprecedented alliance between former enemies. The three alien homeworlds also took notice of the developments each species. Government sent observers to study the cooperation and determine whether similar approaches could work in other situations. The successful rescue and ongoing partnership challenged centuries of assumptions about interspecies relations, but the most important changes were happening in the hearts and minds of individual beings. The alien workers who had participated in the rescue operation became ambassadors for cooperation within their own species. They shared their experiences and encouraged others to consider the benefits of working together. Tekri became a leader among young Vorthik warriors, arguing that true strength came from the courage to trust others and work for common goals. His advocacy for cooperation was based on personal experience and the bonds he had formed during the rescue operations. Opa used her position as a skilled technician to promote collaborative projects between Quilani and other species. She demonstrated that precision and efficiency were enhanced rather than compromised by working with diverse teams that brought different perspectives to problem-solving. Nixel became a bridge between the Nethori collective consciousness and individual relationships. He helped his people understand that personal connections did not weaken the collective but actually strengthened it by creating new sources of motivation and commitment. The changes culminated in a formal ceremony. 6 months after the rescue operation, the 3 alien leaders signed a comprehensive cooperation agreement that established permanent partnerships in mining technology, sharing cultural exchange and mutual defense. Ebara was given the honor of witnessing the signing ceremony as the guest of honor. The little girl who had inspired the alliance watched as her adult friends put their signatures on documents that would change the course of galactic history. The ceremony took place in the main assembly hall of the station with representatives from all 3 species gathered together. The atmosphere was festive and hopeful as beings who had once been enemies celebrated their new partnership. During the ceremony, each alien leader spoke about the lessons they had learned from the rescue operation and the cooperation that had followed. They acknowledged that a small human child had taught them things that centuries of warfare had not shown them about the value of working together. The signed agreement was displayed in the central area of the station, alongside Biora original crayon drawing of all the species holding hands under a bright sun. The child's simple artwork had become a symbol of the new era of cooperation and friendship. As the ceremony concluded, Biora asked her father when they could visit the alien homeworlds. She was excited about meeting more beings from each species and learning about their different ways of life. Her enthusiasm for the future reflected the new possibilities that cooperation had created. The little girl question about visiting other worlds became the inspiration